The alarms on the flagship were still ringing when they told me my life no longer belonged to me. I stood in the command hall, my uniform torn at the shoulder, blood drying on my knuckles, and a fleet officer read out the terms of a treaty I had never seen. Earth and the Veiled Dominion had fought for 6 years. 6 years of silence between the stars, broken only by distant explosions and quiet funerals. Now, without asking me, the war was ending, and I was the price. My name is Ethan Cole. I was a soldier, nothing more. I did not come from a rich family. I did not have a famous name. I was chosen because I was easy to spare. That is what the officer told me, though not in those exact words. He said I was symbolically valuable. I understood what that meant. If something happened to me, no one important would grieve. The Veiled Dominion wanted a blood bond to seal the peace. Not a simple handshake, not a signature on paper. They wanted marriage, a joining of one human and one veil, witnessed by both empires, impossible to break without restarting the war. My commanding officer looked at me with something close to pity when she told me I had been selected. "You survived the front lines," she said. "Command believes you can survive this too." I almost laughed. Nothing about her tone made it sound like a reward. 3 days later, I stood inside a Veil transport ship, the walls glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Every surface curved, instead of meeting at sharp angles, as if the ship itself refused straight lines. I did not feel like a soldier anymore. I felt like cargo. They gave me new clothes, dark fabric stitched with silver thread, heavier than anything I had worn before. A Veil attendant adjusted the collar without speaking to me, his eyes avoiding mine the entire time. I wanted to ask him questions. I wanted to ask anyone questions. No one answered. When the ship finally landed, I stepped out into air that smelled faintly of metal and rain. The Veil homeworld stretched in front of me, towers rising like frozen waves, silver and impossibly tall. Thousands of Veil citizens lined the streets, their skin ranging from pale violet to deep blue, their eyes catching the light in ways human eyes never could. They did not cheer, they watched, silent, still, judging. I was led into a massive hall built from stone that seemed to shimmer under its own light. At the far end stood a woman who could only be described as carved from starlight. Princess Ethra. Her hair was silver white, braided with small crystals that caught every beam of light in the room. Her eyes were a deep violet, sharp enough to cut through steel. She wore armor instead of a gown, polished and gleaming, a clear message that she had not come here willingly either. She did not smile. She did not even blink when our eyes met. I felt the weight of her stare like a physical thing, pressing against my chest. The ceremony began without warmth. An elder Veil priest spoke words in a language I did not understand, his voice echoing off the stone walls. A translator device on my wrist buzzed quietly, offering broken pieces of meaning. Union, peace, bond unbreakable. I barely heard any of it. My focus stayed locked on Ethra, who stood rigid, her jaw tight, her hands clenched at her sides. When the priest instructed us to join hands, she extended hers slowly, as if forcing her own arm to move against its will. Her skin was cool to the touch, smoother than I expected. I do not know what I expected, honestly. Something rough, something alien in the way movies always showed. Instead, her hand simply felt like a hand, trembling slightly, though I doubted anyone else noticed. "You may look at her," the priest said through the translator. "She is your bonded now." I looked. She looked back, and for one heartbeat, I saw something raw behind the ice in her eyes. Anger. Not at me specifically, I realized. Anger at the situation. At being handed over like a political trophy, the same as I had been. We were pronounced bonded in front of thousands of witnesses, human and Veil alike, watching through screens across 2 galaxies. No cheering came from the crowd, no music played. Just silence, heavy and cold, wrapping around us like a blanket neither of us wanted. After the ceremony, guards escorted me through endless corridors to a chamber that would become my new home. The room was beautiful, in a way that felt more like a cage than a comfort. Tall windows looked out over the city, but they did not open. A bed large enough for 4 people sat untouched in the center of the room. Everything gleamed, polished, perfect, and utterly foreign. HFY did not join me that first night. I did not expect her to. I sat by the window for hours, watching strange moons rise over an alien skyline, wondering if anyone back home would even remember my name in a few years. The next morning, a servant arrived to inform me that Princess HFY required my presence in the Eastern Garden. I followed without argument, uncertain what waited for me. Vale Gardens, I quickly learned, were nothing like the gardens on Earth. Trees grew upside down in some sections, their roots reaching toward the sky, held in place by some kind of technology I did not understand. Flowers glowed faintly, pulsing with soft colors. HFY stood near a fountain that shimmered like liquid glass. She did not turn when I approached. "You will learn our customs," she said, her voice cold and precise. "You will learn our language. You will not embarrass me in front of my court." "Good morning to you too," I said. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp with irritation. "This is not a joke, human." "I know it's not," I said. "I didn't choose this any more than you did." For a moment, something flickered across her face, quickly hidden behind the same icy mask she had worn since the ceremony. "Then we understand each other," she said. "We will perform our roles, nothing more." I nodded slowly. Understood. She turned and walked away without another word, her guards falling into step behind her, leaving me alone in a garden that glowed with colors I had no names for, standing at the edge of a life I never asked for, wondering how long I could survive being nothing more than a performance in someone else's peace treaty. I did not know then that 3 months later, everything I believed about that morning would be proven wrong. The palace ran on rules no one bothered to explain to me. I learned most of them by breaking them first. On my 3rd day, I sat in the wrong chair during a morning council meeting. A low chair reserved for junior attendants, not for someone bonded to the princess. The room fell into a silence so sharp I could feel it pressing against my ears. HFY did not look at me, but her jaw tightened, and later that evening, a servant delivered a scroll listing seating arrangements for every room in the palace, along with a note that simply said, "Memorize this." I memorized it. I had nothing else to do. The Vale court treated me like a stain on something they considered pure. Nobles whispered when I passed, not bothering to lower their voices enough. Short-lived, simple-minded, a pet for the princess to manage. I heard those words more times than I could count, always spoken as if I could not understand their language, though the device on my wrist translated every syllable. I did not respond to any of it. Anger would have proven them right. Instead, I watched. I learned the names of the guards who actually did their jobs instead of standing around for show. I learned which advisors truly cared about the well-being of the Vale people, and which ones cared only about power. I learned that HFY, despite her icy exterior, worked far harder than anyone gave her credit for. She woke before sunrise every day, reviewing reports on food distribution, trade routes, and border security. She sat through hours of council meetings where old men argued over meaningless traditions while real problems went ignored. I began to notice the exhaustion behind her eyes, hidden carefully beneath a mask of perfect composure. One afternoon, I found her alone in a records room, surrounded by stacks of data tablets, her fingers moving quickly across a glowing screen. She looked up when I entered, immediately straightening her posture, as if caught doing something shameful. "I did not summon you," she said. "I know," I said. "I got lost." She studied me for a moment, clearly not believing a word of it. "The eastern wing is in the opposite direction. Guess I'm worse at directions than I thought." Her lips almost moved into something that could have been the beginning of a smile, but she caught herself, smoothing her expression back into stone. "You should return to your chamber." I glanced at the tablets scattered across her desk. "What are you working on?" "Matters that do not concern you." "Try me anyway." She hesitated, clearly debating whether to dismiss me entirely. Finally, she gestured toward a chart glowing faintly on the screen. 3 border settlements have reported failing crop yields. If it continues, we will face shortages within 2 seasons. I studied the numbers, unfamiliar with Vale agricultural systems, but able to recognize patterns from my own training in supply logistics back on Earth. Have you checked the irrigation systems in those settlements? On Earth, failing yields often trace back to water distribution, not the crops themselves. She blinked, clearly surprised that I offered something useful instead of empty comfort. Our systems are different from Earth's. Maybe, I said, but water is water. Worth checking before you assume the worst. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then pulled up a new chart, cross-referencing water distribution records against crop failure reports. Her eyes narrowed as she found overlapping patterns she had missed before. This is... She paused, clearly reluctant to admit it. This is helpful. Look at that, I said. 2 whole words strung together into something almost like a compliment. She shot me a sharp look, though I noticed the corner of her mouth twitch again before she forced it still. Do not grow comfortable, human. Wouldn't dream of it. That night marked a small shift between us, though neither of us acknowledged it out loud. She began allowing me into more of her meetings, not as a participant, but as a silent observer standing near the back of the room. I learned more about Vale politics in those weeks than I ever expected to understand. I learned that her mother, the Empress, ruled with an iron grip, trusting almost no one, least of all her own daughter. The Empress visited the Eastern Wing one evening, her presence announced by a wave of silence rippling through every hallway she passed. She was tall, statuesque, her eyes colder than her daughter's had ever been. She looked at me the way someone looks at an insect that wandered somewhere it did not belong. So this is the human, she said, circling me slowly. Smaller than I expected. Nice to meet you too, I said. HFY stepped forward quickly. Mother, he is... I did not ask for your opinion, the Empress interrupted, her voice sharp enough to silence the entire room. She turned back to me. You understand your purpose here, human. You are a symbol, nothing more. The moment you cease being useful, you will be removed. I held her gaze, refusing to look away first. Understood. She studied me for another long moment before turning and leaving as suddenly as she arrived, her guards trailing behind her like shadows. The room exhaled collectively once she was gone. HFY turned to me, her expression unreadable. You should have bowed. Didn't feel like it, I said. That was reckless. Probably. She stared at me, something flickering behind her violet eyes that I could not quite name. Frustration, maybe. Or something closer to worry. You cannot continue provoking her. She holds more power than you understand. I'm not trying to provoke anyone, I said. I'm just not going to pretend to be smaller than I am. Something about that answer seemed to catch her off guard. She did not respond immediately, simply studying my face as if trying to solve a puzzle she had not expected to encounter. Weeks passed in a rhythm neither of us planned. Mornings filled with council meetings I quietly observed. Afternoons spent wandering palace corridors, learning names, learning faces, learning which servants smiled genuinely and which ones only performed politeness out of fear. Evenings occasionally found HFY and me in the same room, working through problems neither of us had solved alone. She remained guarded, careful never to let her walls drop too far, but I began noticing small changes. She started asking my opinion on matters unrelated to Earth, curious how a human perspective might solve problems her own advisors overlooked. She stopped correcting my manners quite so often, though she still reminded me constantly not to sit in chairs meant for junior attendants. One evening, during a formal dinner attended by several visiting Vale dignitaries, an older noble made a comment about humans being little more than clever animals, capable of following instructions but incapable of true intelligence. The table fell into an uncomfortable silence, everyone waiting to see how I would react. Before I could respond, HFY spoke first, her voice calm but edged with something sharp enough to cut glass. Clever animals do not solve irrigation failures your own engineers overlooked for 3 seasons. The noble's face paled slightly. He mumbled an apology and quickly changed the subject. I glanced at HFY, surprised. She did not look at me, focusing instead on her plate, though I noticed the faintest hint of color rising along her cheeks. Later that night, walking back toward our separate chambers, I finally asked her about it. "You defended me." "I defended accuracy," she said quickly. "Nothing more." "Sure," I said, unable to hide the small smile forming on my face. She glanced at me sideways, clearly annoyed that I noticed. "Do not read too much into it, human." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said again, though this time neither of us fully believed it. The following week brought a diplomatic gathering unlike anything I had attended before. A gala meant to celebrate 3 months since the treaty was signed, drawing dignitaries from across both empires. Guards lined every hallway leading toward the grand ballroom, more security than I had seen since arriving on the Vale homeworld. I did not think much of it at the time. I should have. I had no idea that night would change everything between HFY and me, pulling us from careful distance into something neither of us could ignore any longer. The grand ballroom glittered with light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Crystal fixtures floated near the ceiling, unattached to any visible wire, casting soft golden light across a sea of Vale nobles dressed in their finest silks and polished armor. Music drifted through the air, unlike anything I had heard before, built from tones too smooth and layered to belong to any human instrument. I stood near the edge of the room, watching HFY move through the crowd like water flowing around stone. She greeted dignitaries with practiced grace, her expression calm and composed, though I had learned to recognize the small signs of exhaustion hiding beneath her posture. A tightness at the corner of her eyes, a stiffness in how she held her shoulders. A young officer named Darren approached me near the refreshment table, one of the few Vale who had shown genuine kindness since my arrival. He served as an advisor to the Palace Security Division, and over the past weeks we had spoken enough times that I considered him something close to a friend in a place otherwise filled with cold stares. "You look uncomfortable," he said, handing me a glass filled with something pale blue that smelled faintly of citrus. "I always look uncomfortable at these things," I said. "It's part of my charm." He laughed quietly, glancing toward HFY across the room. "She looks tired tonight." "She always looks tired," I said. "She just hides it better than most." Darren studied me for a moment, something thoughtful crossing his expression. "You watch her closely." "Somebody has to," I said, though the words came out more honest than I intended. Before he could respond, a sudden commotion rippled through the crowd near the main entrance. Voices rose in alarm, guards shifting quickly toward the disturbance. I could not see clearly through the crowd, but something in the air changed instantly, a tension sharp enough to cut through the music and laughter filling the room moments before. Darren's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon at his side. "Stay close to me." I did not listen. My eyes searched instead for HFY, finding her near the center of the room, still unaware of the growing disturbance behind her. A figure moved through the crowd with unnatural speed, weaving between startled nobles, heading directly toward her with clear intent. I did not think, I moved. Pushing through the crowd faster than I thought possible, I reached her just as the figure closed the final distance. A small device gripped tightly in their hand, aimed directly at her. I do not fully remember the next few seconds. Instinct took over completely, years of training kicking in without conscious thought. I threw myself between them, knocking the device sideways as it activated, a burst of energy grazing across my shoulder instead of striking HFY directly. Pain exploded through my arm, sharp and blinding, but I stayed on my feet long enough to see guards swarm the attacker, pulling them away as chaos erupted around us. HFY stood frozen, her eyes wide with something I had never seen on her face before. Pure shock, pure fear, stripped completely of the composed mask she wore every single day. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking slightly as she reached toward me, her hands hovering uncertainly, as if afraid to touch the wound. "I'm fine," I said, though my knees clearly disagreed, buckling slightly beneath me. Guards rushed forward, forming a protective circle around us as medical staff arrived within seconds. Everything blurred together after that. Voices shouting instructions, hands lifting me carefully, the ceiling shifting past my vision as they carried me toward the medical wing. Through it all, I felt Ythra's hand gripping mine tightly, refusing to let go, her fingers trembling against my skin. I woke hours later in a bright room filled with soft humming machines, my shoulder wrapped tightly, a dull ache pulsing beneath the bandages. Ythra sat beside the bed, still dressed in her gala attire, though the elegant composure from earlier had completely vanished. Her hair had come loose from its careful braids, falling messily around her shoulders. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "You are awake," she said quietly, relief evident in her voice despite her attempt to sound controlled. "Guess getting shot doesn't keep me down for long," I said, my voice rougher than I expected. "That is not something to joke about," she said sharply, though her hand remained wrapped tightly around mine, refusing to pull away. "Sorry," I said. "Bad habit." She stared at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, walls I had watched her build carefully over months beginning to crack. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Step in front of me," she said. "You could have simply moved out of the way. You could have let the guards handle it. Instead, you chose to place yourself directly in danger for someone who has treated you coldly since the moment you arrived." I thought about the question honestly before answering. I didn't think about it, I admitted. I just moved. Wasn't calculating odds or weighing consequences. My body reacted before my mind caught up. "Humans truly function this way?" she asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of the earlier fear in her voice. "Acting before calculating." "Sometimes," I said. "Especially when it matters." She fell silent, processing that answer carefully, her thumb tracing small circles across the back of my hand, without seeming to notice she was doing it. On Vale, we are taught that emotion clouds judgment, that instinct leads to mistakes. Every action must be measured, calculated, controlled. "Sounds exhausting," I said. A small, surprised laugh escaped her, quickly covered by her free hand, as if laughing were something forbidden. "It is," she admitted softly, "more exhausting than anyone realizes." We sat in silence for a while after that, comfortable in a way neither of us had experienced since the ceremony that bound us together. The machines hummed quietly around us, the only sound filling the room besides our breathing. "Ythra," I said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "You may." "Why did marrying me upset you so much, back at the beginning? I understand the politics of it, but you looked at me like I was something dangerous." She was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "I was promised to someone else," she finally said, "before the treaty. A Vale noble from a powerful house. Our bond had been arranged since childhood. When the peace agreement required marriage to a human instead, that arrangement was dissolved entirely. Everything I believed about my future disappeared in a single announcement." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That's a lot to lose all at once." "It was not love," she clarified quickly. "The arrangement, I mean. It was duty, expectation, but it was still mine, something I understood, something predictable. And then suddenly, I was bound instead to someone from a species my people barely understood, someone unpredictable in every way." "And now?" I asked carefully. She looked at me then, really looked, her violet eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Now I am no longer certain. Unpredictable is a bad thing." Neither of us spoke for a while after that admission, the weight of it settling between us gently, without the sharp edges that usually accompanied our conversations. She stayed beside me long after visiting hours ended, guards outside the door choosing not to enforce rules neither of us acknowledged breaking. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion finally overtook her, her head tilting slightly, resting against the edge of the bed, her hand still wrapped around mine. I watched her sleep for a while, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through my chest, replacing the earlier pain from my shoulder entirely. The following morning brought an investigation into the attack, led personally by Darren, who arrived at the medical wing looking exhausted but determined. The attacker, it turned out, belonged to a small faction within the Vale nobility who believed the treaty with Earth represented a betrayal of Vale tradition, a group who viewed my marriage to Ithra as an insult requiring correction. They wanted to eliminate the princess, Darren explained quietly, careful to keep his voice low enough that Ithra, resting in a chair nearby, would not overhear. Believing her death would collapse the treaty entirely, forcing the Empire back into war. And now? I asked. Now they understand the treaty has protectors willing to bleed for it, he said, glancing toward my bandaged shoulder. Word travels quickly through the palace. The human who threw himself in front of an attack meant for the princess. It has changed how many people view you. I was not sure how to respond to that. I had not acted to send a message to anyone. I had simply moved without thinking, driven by instinct alone. But if that instinct had somehow shifted opinions within the palace, I was not going to complain about it. Ithra stirred awake shortly after Darren left, blinking slowly, momentarily disoriented before her eyes focused on me. "You are still here," she said, relief clear in her voice. "Where else would I go?" I asked. "I'm stuck in this bed until they clear me." She almost smiled at that, the expression looking foreign and beautiful on her usually composed face. "I meant here, with me. I assumed you would prefer solitude after everything that happened." "Honestly," I said, "I'd rather have you here than be alone." Something shifted visibly across her features, surprise mixing with something softer, something she seemed unwilling to name out loud just yet. She reached forward, adjusting the blanket covering my legs, an unnecessary gesture that felt more like an excuse to remain close. "The court will speak of this event for months," she said quietly. "Some will see it as proof that our bond holds true value, beyond simple politics." "And what do you see it as?" I asked. She met my eyes directly, something unguarded flickering across her expression. "I am beginning to see many things differently than I did 3 months ago." Neither of us spoke further about what that meant exactly, though the shift between us felt undeniable, something fragile and new forming quietly in the space where distance used to live. I remained in the medical wing for 2 more days, and each night Ithra returned, finding reasons to stay longer than necessary, our conversations stretching later into the evening, covering topics far beyond politics or duty. We spoke about Earth, about my childhood, about the family I left behind when I enlisted. She spoke about Vale history, about pressures placed on her since birth as the heir to an empire, about dreams she rarely allowed herself to consider, buried beneath decades of expectation. By the time I was finally released from medical care, something between us had changed permanently, though neither of us spoke the word attached to that change directly. We returned to our separate routines, council meetings and diplomatic functions filling our days as they always had. But something lingered beneath the surface now, an awareness neither of us could ignore, a warmth replacing the cold distance that once defined every interaction between us. I did not know yet how deeply that warmth would be tested in the weeks ahead, when politics and family expectation would attempt to tear apart something that had only just begun to grow. 3 months had passed since the ceremony that bound Ithra and me together, and everything about my life had changed in ways I never expected. I no longer felt like a prisoner wandering unfamiliar hallways. I felt something closer to belonging, though I still could not fully name what was growing between the princess and me. That sense of stability shattered the morning I was summoned to a private meeting with the Empress. A guard arrived at my chamber before sunrise, his expression carefully blank, offering no explanation beyond instructions to follow him immediately. I dressed quickly, unease settling into my stomach as we walked through corridors I rarely used, deep within the administrative wing of the palace where important decisions were made far from public view. The Empress waited alone in a private study, surrounded by tall shelves filled with data crystals and ancient records. She did not look up when I entered, continuing to review a tablet glowing softly in her hands. "You survived an assassination attempt," she said finally, still not looking at me. Many in my court now view you as something more than a political necessity. Some even whisper that you might be worthy of respect. That's not why I did it, I said. I am aware, she replied, finally meeting my eyes, which makes your usefulness to me even more complicated. I said nothing, waiting for her to continue, sensing that whatever came next would not be good news. The treaty required a symbolic union, she said. It did not require permanence. 3 months has satisfied the political requirement. Public sentiment has been secured. Your usefulness in that regard has concluded. My chest tightened. What does that mean exactly? It means arrangements have been made, she said calmly, as if discussing something as simple as weather patterns. A transport departs within the week, returning you to Earth. HFY will remain here, free to pursue a bond more appropriate to her position, once sufficient time has passed to avoid political embarrassment. And HFY knows about this? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. HFY will be informed once preparations are finalized, the Empress said. Her opinion on the matter is not required. She understands her duty, even when she resists it. I stood there, processing the weight of her words, memories flashing quickly through my mind. Late-night conversations in the medical wing, small smiles she rarely allowed herself. The way her hand had gripped mine so tightly, refusing to let go. None of that seemed to matter here, in a room where politics erased everything personal without hesitation. I understand, I said quietly, though every part of me rejected the words even as I spoke them. Good, the Empress said, returning her attention to the tablet in her hands, dismissing me entirely without another glance. I left the study in a daze, walking through corridors that suddenly felt colder than they had in weeks. Part of me wanted to accept this outcome quietly, the way I had accepted every difficult assignment throughout my years of service. Duty came first. Personal feelings came second, always. I had learned that lesson early in my military career, and I had never questioned it before now. But something about this situation felt different, and I could not push away the tightness building steadily in my chest as I made my way back toward my chamber. I did not see HFY for the rest of that day, occupied entirely with council obligations that kept her away from the Eastern Wing. I spent the hours pacing, replaying the Empress's words over and over, trying to convince myself that leaving was the right decision, the practical decision, the one that avoided further complications for everyone involved. I almost believed it, until HFY found me late that evening, standing near the same fountain where she had once coldly informed me that our marriage would remain nothing more than performance. You have been avoiding me, she said, her voice carrying an edge of concern rather than accusation. I haven't been avoiding you, I said, just thinking. About what? I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal, unwilling to burden her with a decision that had apparently already been made without her input. Nothing important. She studied me carefully, her sharp eyes catching the tension I tried to hide. You are lying to me. I sighed, deciding honesty mattered more than protecting her from difficult truths. Your mother called me to a meeting this morning. She's arranging my return to Earth. She says the treaty's political requirements have been satisfied, says you'll be free to pursue a more appropriate bond once enough time has passed. HFY went completely still, her expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for me to track clearly. Shock, anger, something that looked dangerously close to panic. She did what? She said your opinion wasn't required, I added quietly, said you understand your duty. My duty, HFY repeated, her voice sharpening into something cold and furious. My mother speaks constantly of duty while ignoring everything else entirely. HFY, I said carefully, maybe this is for the best. I never belonged here. You know that better than anyone. Do not, she said sharply, stepping closer, her eyes blazing with an intensity I had never seen directed at me before. Do not stand there and tell me what belongs and what does not after everything these past months have shown us both. I did not know how to respond to that, my chest tightening painfully as I watched her struggle to control emotions she had spent her entire life suppressing. I will speak with her, Ythra said finally, turning sharply toward the palace entrance. This decision was made without consulting me, and I refused to accept it silently. Ythra, wait, I said, reaching for her arm. Confronting her might make things worse. For both of us. She turned back, her eyes softer now, though still burning with determination. Ethan, I have spent my entire life accepting decisions made without my consent, accepting arrangements designed by others, accepting a future I never chose for myself. I am done accepting. Before I could respond, she pulled away and disappeared into the palace, leaving me standing alone beside the fountain, uncertain whether her intervention would change anything or simply make an already painful situation considerably worse. The following days passed in tense uncertainty. I saw Ythra only briefly during that time, her expression tightly controlled whenever we crossed paths, giving away nothing about whatever conversations were happening behind closed doors within the Empress's private chambers. Preparations for my departure continued regardless. Guards arriving to inventory my belongings. Transport schedules confirmed and finalized, without any acknowledgement of Ythra's objections. 2 nights before my scheduled departure, Darren found me in the garden, his expression grave. "The Empress will not change her decision," he said quietly. "Ythra has argued relentlessly, but tradition holds significant weight within the council. Many advisors support your removal, believing it strengthens Ythra's position for a more advantageous future bond." "So that's it then," I said, staring out over the glowing garden without really seeing it. 3 months, and everything ends because a council decided it should. "I am sorry," Darren said, and he genuinely seemed to mean it. "You became more than a political symbol to many of us within this palace. That should count for something." "Apparently it doesn't count for enough," I said. The morning of my departure arrived too quickly, gray skies stretching over the palace as guards escorted me toward the transport bay, where the ship waiting to return me to Earth sat gleaming under artificial light. I carried very little with me, most of my belongings remaining behind, a strange metaphor for how temporary my place here had truly been, regardless of what I had allowed myself to believe. I did not expect Ythra to appear, given the tension of the past 2 days, but as guards led me toward the ship's entrance, I heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind, followed by a voice, sharp enough to freeze the entire transport bay into silence. "Stop," Ythra commanded, striding forward with a fierce determination I had never witnessed from her before, not even during council meetings where she fought fiercely for policies she believed in. The guards hesitated, glancing uncertainly toward the Empress, who arrived moments later, flanked by several senior advisors, her expression sharp with displeasure at the public disruption unfolding before her entire court. "Ythra," the Empress said, her voice carrying a clear warning, "this matter has already been decided." "Not by me," Ythra said, standing firmly between me and the transport ship, refusing to move despite her mother's obvious anger. "You made this decision without consulting me, without considering anything beyond outdated tradition and political convenience. The treaty's requirements have been satisfied," the Empress said coldly. "Continuing this arrangement serves no further political purpose." "He is not a political arrangement," Ythra said, her voice carrying across the entire transport bay, loud enough that every guard, every advisor, every witness present heard her clearly. "He is mine, chosen by circumstance initially, yes, but kept now by choice, my choice." Silence fell across the bay, thick and heavy, everyone present clearly stunned by the raw honesty in her declaration. I stood frozen, uncertain whether I was actually hearing these words or simply imagining them out of desperate hope. The Empress's expression hardened. "You would defy centuries of veiled tradition for a human soldier. I would defy anything that attempts to take away something I have only just discovered matters to me," Ythra said, her voice steady despite the visible tension radiating from her entire posture. "You raised me to believe duty always outweighs desire. But you never taught me what happens when duty and desire finally align, pointing toward the exact same outcome." I watched Ythra stand her ground against her own mother, against centuries of expectation, against an entire empire's traditions, all for someone the court had once dismissed as nothing more than clever cargo delivered for political convenience. Whatever happened next, I understood clearly that everything between us had changed permanently, in front of witnesses who would carry this moment across the entire Vale Dominion by morning. The transport bay remained frozen in silence, every guard and advisor watching the confrontation unfold between mother and daughter, empire and heart, tradition and something neither of them had a name for yet. The Empress studied HFY carefully, her expression unreadable, though I could see calculation working behind her sharp eyes, weighing political consequences against her daughter's unexpected defiance. "You understand what you are asking," the Empress finally said, her voice quieter now, though no less firm. "A ruling princess cannot simply keep a human consort out of personal preference. Our laws do not accommodate such an arrangement. The council would never approve it." "Then I will change the laws," HFY said without hesitation. A murmur rippled through the gathered advisors, some clearly shocked by the boldness of her statement, others exchanging glances that suggested quiet curiosity rather than outright disapproval. "Changing centuries of tradition is not accomplished through wishful declarations," the Empress said. "It requires council votes, legal restructuring, support from noble houses who will resist any deviation from established practice." "Then I will earn that support," HFY said. "I will present my case before the full council. I will show them exactly why this arrangement benefits the empire, beyond simple politics, beyond outdated tradition." The Empress remained silent for a long moment, studying her daughter with an expression I could not fully interpret. Finally, she spoke again, her voice carrying a warning edge. "Understand this clearly, HFY. If you pursue this path and fail, the consequences will fall entirely upon you. I will not intervene to soften that failure." "I understand," HFY said firmly. The Empress turned and walked away without another word, her advisors following closely behind her, leaving HFY standing alone in the transport bay, her chest rising and falling quickly from the intensity of the confrontation. The guards who had been escorting me toward the ship stepped back uncertainly, unsure whether their orders still applied. HFY turned to face me, some of her fierce composure softening into something more vulnerable now that her mother had departed. "I did not ask you first," she said quietly. "I should have asked whether you even wished to remain here, rather than assuming." "HFY," I said, stepping closer, my chest tight with an emotion I had been trying to avoid naming for weeks. "I wasn't going to fight for myself. I figured it wasn't my place to demand something like that. But watching you fight for it just now, in front of your entire court, in front of your own mother, that told me everything I needed to know." "And what did it tell you?" she asked softly. "That maybe I do belong here after all," I said, "not because of politics or treaties. Because of you." Something in her expression finally broke completely, the careful composure she maintained constantly dissolving into something raw and real, her eyes bright with emotion she no longer bothered hiding from the guards and staff still watching nearby. The following weeks tested every ounce of determination HFY possessed. She worked tirelessly, meeting privately with council members, presenting detailed proposals outlining benefits the human alliance provided beyond simple political symbolism. She highlighted trade agreements strengthened by mutual trust, technological exchanges benefiting both empires, security partnerships that had already prevented further conflict along contested border regions. I helped where I could, though most of the work fell entirely on her shoulders. I spent hours reviewing agricultural data with her, the same skills that first impressed her months earlier now proving useful again as she built a case demonstrating tangible benefits from continued human cooperation, benefits made possible specifically through our bond remaining intact. Not everyone within the council supported her efforts. Several noble houses pushed back fiercely, viewing any deviation from tradition as dangerous precedent. Rumors spread throughout the palace, some sympathetic to HFY's cause, others harshly critical, questioning her judgment, her loyalty to Vale customs, even her fitness to eventually inherit the throne. Through it all, Ythra remained resolute, though I watched the toll it took on her. Sleepless nights spent preparing arguments, exhausting days spent defending her position against advisors who had known her since childhood, many of whom felt personally betrayed by her willingness to challenge tradition so openly. "Sometimes I wonder if this is worth the cost," she admitted one evening, exhaustion clear in her voice, as we sat together in the records room where our friendship had first quietly begun months earlier. "Is it?" I asked carefully. She looked at me, something certain replacing the doubt in her eyes almost instantly. "Yes," she said simply. "Every difficult conversation, every lost alliance, every sleepless night. Yes, it is worth it." The day of the final council vote arrived with tension thick enough to feel physically present throughout the entire palace. I was not permitted inside the council chamber itself, forced instead to wait in an adjoining room alongside Darren, who had become one of Ythra's strongest supporters throughout the process, risking his own standing within the court to advocate publicly on her behalf. "She has prepared thoroughly," Darren said, trying to offer reassurance neither of us fully believed. "Her arguments are strong." "Strong arguments don't always win against centuries of tradition," I said, unable to hide the worry building steadily in my chest. We waited for hours, the muffled sound of voices occasionally rising from behind the sealed chamber doors, though nothing clear enough to understand the direction the debate was taking. I paced the small waiting room relentlessly, replaying every moment of the past months, wondering how everything had changed so completely from that cold first morning in the garden when Ythra told me our marriage would remain nothing more than performance. Finally, the chamber doors opened, and Ythra emerged, her expression carefully controlled, giving away nothing about the outcome. She walked directly toward me, guards and advisors trailing behind her, everyone watching closely to see how this moment would unfold. She stopped directly in front of me, and for a long, agonizing moment, said nothing at all. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face, genuine and unguarded, brighter than anything I had seen from her since our bond began. "The council approved the amendment," she said, her voice trembling slightly with relief and disbelief combined. "A ruling princess may retain a bonded consort of any origin, human or otherwise, provided they contribute meaningfully to the empire's well-being. The vote was close, but it passed." Relief flooded through me so powerfully, my knees nearly buckled beneath me. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, reaching for my hand, lacing her fingers through mine, without hesitation, without concern for who witnessed the gesture. "I could not have built this case without your help these past weeks." Word of the council's decision spread quickly throughout the palace, and eventually throughout the entire Vale Dominion, reaching even Earth's command structure within days. My commanding officer sent a brief message expressing surprise at the outcome, though the tone carried something close to respect I had never expected to receive regarding this assignment. The following months brought significant changes to palace life. I was no longer treated as a symbolic afterthought, but as someone with genuine standing within the court, my opinions sought during council discussions, my presence expected rather than merely tolerated. Nobles who once whispered insults now greeted me with careful respect, some even genuine warmth, particularly those who had witnessed firsthand how deeply Ythra fought to keep our bond intact. Ythra herself transformed as well, no longer hiding behind the careful composure she maintained during our first meeting. She laughed more freely now, argued passionately during council sessions without fear of appearing weak, allowed herself moments of genuine joy she had denied herself throughout her entire life before our arrival together. One evening, months after the council's decision, we stood together in the same garden where she had once coldly informed me our marriage would remain purely performative. The glowing flowers pulsed softly around us, moons rising overhead in patterns still unfamiliar to me, though far less strange than they had felt during those early lonely nights. "Do you regret any of this?" Ythra asked quietly, her hand resting comfortably in mine, a gesture that had become natural between us over these past months. "Being chosen for a treaty you never asked to be part of, forced into a life completely foreign to everything you understood before. I thought about the question honestly, remembering that first cold morning, the whispered insults, the loneliness of those early weeks, trapped in a palace that felt more like a cage than a home. I thought about the assassination attempt, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty of nearly losing everything before it had even properly begun. "No," I said finally, meaning it completely, not one single moment of it. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder, comfortable in a way she never allowed herself to be during those first careful weeks between us. "Neither do I," she said softly. "I was forced to marry a stranger 3 months ago, believing it would be the greatest burden of my life." "And now?" I asked. She looked up at me, her violet eyes bright with an emotion neither of us needed to name aloud anymore, the answer written clearly across both our faces. "Now," she said, "I cannot imagine a future where I ever let you go." Standing together beneath alien moons, surrounded by flowers that glowed softly in colors Earth had never known, I understood clearly that sometimes the paths we never choose lead us exactly where we were always meant to be. What began as a political sacrifice, a burden placed upon two unwilling strangers, had grown into something neither empire, nor tradition, nor even we ourselves had ever expected to find. Not a performance, not a symbol, something real, chosen freely, protected fiercely, and never, ever abandoned.